Okay, well, let's bring it over to the International Criminal Court, something I haven't heard of in like forever, if at all. And they issued a warrant for the arrest of Benjamin Netanyahu. What is this? And then the extra added drama that one of the top advisors of making this happen was George Clooney's wife. So you have that little People magazine intrigue. But what the heck is going on with the International Criminal Court?
Well, the International Criminal Court is one of several international courts. It's not to be confused with the International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice, we saw earlier in the year, was hearing a dispute from South Africa. South Africa brought a case against Israel at the International Criminal Court saying that Israel had violated the Genocide Convention. It's all nonsense, but the reason Israel had to answer that case was that Israel is a party to the International Genocide Convention, and the International Court of Justice is there to adjudicate between states. It's there to say that disagree can come here and hash out their differences in a court of law that looks at international law rather than having wars, rather than having sanctions and things that damage everybody. So South Africa took Israel to the International Court of Justice, and Israel reluctantly went along with it, even though all of these international institutions are biased against Israel. The kind of diplomats, the kind of bureaucrats who get these appointments, the kind of judges, they come from often dictatorships that hate democracies like Israel. They come from a foreign policy establishment on the international level that is anti-American and anti-Israel, very pro-communist, pro-Soviet, now pro-third world. So they come from an ideologically biased place. But nevertheless, Israel is party to the treaties that get adjudicated before the International Court of Justice, so they have to show up and make a defense. The other court is called the International Criminal Court. And the International Criminal Court is for prosecuting people who commit war crimes or violate international law and can't be tried in any other country because their own country often won't try them, won't prosecute them. And it was set up to prosecute crimes against humanity. The understanding being that, for example, in Nazi Germany, you could not have trusted the Nazi legal system to prosecute the German war criminals. So you had to have some other legal mechanism to do that, to issue warrants to stop them from committing further crimes and so forth. And there was a treaty called the Rome Statute that was signed to create this International Criminal Court. Now, the United States and Israel are not signatories to this treaty. They're not parties to the treaty. Therefore, the United States and Israel are not under the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. Why have we, the United States, decided not to join the International Criminal Court? Aren't we in favor of prosecuting people for genocide? And the answer is yes, we are in favor. The problem is that we are concerned anti-American bias of these institutions. They would abuse their power to prosecute Americans for things that our military does overseas that the Soviets and the Islamists consider, quote-unquote, war crimes. So if we take out Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, we just go into his house and kill him, which is what we did under Trump, then they would say, oh, that's murder, that's a war crime, blah, blah, blah. You have people in the world, you have regimes in the world who get representation on these bodies who would abuse that power. And they would issue arrest warrants against American soldiers, American leaders, so that anywhere they go in the world, they'd have to be arrested under international criminal warrants. So the United States decided we would not join this. We're not opposed to the International Criminal Court, and we allow our own citizens to participate in it as prosecutors, as long as they're prosecuting other people. That's how Jack Smith, the guy who's prosecuting Trump now, ended up working at the International Criminal Court for several years, prosecuting war crimes in Kosovo. But we don't allow the International Criminal Court to touch any Americans. And in fact, there are laws on the books that state that if any American official or soldier is detained by the International Criminal Court, the president has authorization to use whatever means necessary, which means also military force, to get that person out of detention under the International Criminal Court. The critics of that law, the critics of that law, which passed in 2002, called it the Hague Invasion Law because it would allow us to invade the Netherlands, basically, and free American prisoners. But
which is awesome.
But the reason we passed that law was because the war on terror had just started. It was right after 9/11, and we were concerned that the enemies of the United States would use the International Criminal Court to say that by going after the Taliban in Afghanistan or terrorists wherever else they were, we were committing war crimes and violating international law and so forth. So that law says you cannot participate in any International Criminal Court proceedings that affect the United States or that affect the allies of the United States, and it lists Israel specifically alongside other countries that are not members of NATO, like Australia and so forth. So you have this policy of the United States. Israel has a similar policy. Israel doesn't participate in the International Criminal Court for the same reason. Nevertheless, the Israelis have been afraid for a long time that if the International Criminal Court issues warrants against its leaders or its soldiers, they would be arrested. If they go to Europe, if they travel anywhere outside of the Middle East, they could be arrested. By the way, when you see Israelis with masks, the Israeli soldiers wearing masks, they're not wearing masks because they're afraid of being targeted by terrorists, the way Mexican police wear masks because they're afraid of being targeted by the cartels. They're wearing masks because they're afraid that some Yahoo in some country somewhere is going to bring some kind of criminal charge against them if they recognize them. And they can't travel to Europe, they can't travel outside of Israel if that's the case. A lot of Israelis work outside Israel or study for a while outside Israel before returning to Israel. So this is a very real fear, and now that fear has become quite concrete with these arrest warrants against Netanyahu and against his defense minister. But what happened was, under Trump, we could sense that the International Criminal Court was already going to try to investigate the United States. So Trump issued an executive order issuing sanctions against the International Criminal Court. He froze the assets of key International Criminal Court officials. He denied them entry visas to the United States, and he said, you guys are not coming here. You're not doing anything. You're not going to touch a single American. And again, in that executive order, they repeated the provision that it also applies to our allies, to Israel, to other countries. So Trump sanctioned the ICC, the International Criminal Court, which is just about the strongest action you can take. Biden comes into office and he reverses the sanctions. He revokes Trump's executive order. And he says, we want to be nice now. We want to be everybody's friend. America's back. Diplomacy's back. We want to be nice to all these international institutions, even though we know they hate us. And actually, Secretary of State Antony Blinken even issued a statement celebrating this revocation of Trump's executive order, acknowledging that, we know they're biased on the issue of Afghanistan, and we're aware that they're biased against Israel, but we hope to work with them on reforming the International Criminal Court. We're going to work with them to reform their institutions so they don't have this bias anymore. It's all going to be wonderful and kumbaya, and we are the world. Well, fast forward to today, the International Criminal Court is now seeking arrest warrants against the democratically elected prime minister of Israel and his defense minister, by the way, who's one of Netanyahu's political rivals. So, if you want an alternative to Netanyahu, this is the worst way to do it. By going after Gallant, the defense minister, the International Criminal Court signaled to Israelis that they're all fair game. That's why the Israeli opposition, including people who hate Netanyahu, have all denounced this, and they understand it's a threat to their country as a whole. It basically criminalizes the fight against terrorism. There's no reason to accuse Israel of war crimes. It hasn't done anything other than obey international law and going after these terrorists. But anyway, that's where things are.
That's super interesting. I'm sorry, I'm mesmerized by a bunch of things. First of all, I'm thinking about this group of people who work at the International Criminal Court and how high and mighty and important they think they are. And I would venture to say 99% of Americans have never heard of them. If I met someone at a cocktail party that's like, I'm a judge on the International Criminal, what are you talking about? I don't even know what this made up thing is. So with that bias that I have, that ignorance, is this a giant nothing burger because this is just a bunch of goofballs cosplaying being important in The Hague, the Netherlands? Or is this a real, a giant curveball could become a real thing, and maybe we invade the Netherlands because of it?
Right. Well, under that 2002 law, we are actually authorized to invade the Netherlands to free any Israeli officials who are imprisoned by the ICC. If that happens, if Netanyahu is arrested, the president has the authority under this law. It's called the American Service Members Protection Act. He has the authority to go in and send the special forces in to free Netanyahu from The Hague.
That's an awesome movie. But
yeah,
how are they going to arrest Netanyahu? Are they really going to go into Israel and arrest Netanyahu?
No, this kind of thing usually happens if they travel outside the country. But I don't think he's actually going to be arrested because the Israelis, of course, themselves would send their own special forces first before they allowed us to. But the real reason this is a huge problem is it's criminalizing the fight against terror. And what that means is that terrorists now have a license to continue attacking. Hamas doesn't care if its officials get arrested or warrants against them by the ICC. They're still hiding in tunnels. They're living in Doha and Qatar. They're not afraid of the ICC, the International Criminal Court, because they don't care about international law anyway. They violate that law all the time by murdering civilians and committing mass rape and things like that. So they don't care about this, but the Israelis do care, and the Americans care. We care because this means we can't fight against terrorism without risking legal jeopardy to our leaders, to our ordinary soldiers. This is a big problem. And Biden is out there now talking about how outraged he is about this. Well, he's the one who lifted the sanctions. And more to the point, next month in L.A., he's holding a fundraiser with George Clooney. George Clooney's wife, Amal Clooney, as you mentioned earlier, is one of the lawyers that was consulted on this arrest warrant situation from the International Criminal Court. The chief prosecutor's name is Karim Khan, a guy named Karim Khan. He worked with Clooney. He thanks her specifically in his press release. So Biden can express all the outrage he wants, but if he really cared, he would cancel this fundraiser with the Clooneys, who are responsible indirectly in George's case and directly in Amal's case for issuing these warrants against democratically elected leaders fighting terrorism, because it's a danger to us all. That's what the American legislation recognizes. That's what Trump recognized in his executive order, that actions taken by the International Criminal Court against democratic countries fighting terrorism are a threat to American national security.